Morning.
Good morning.
Echo what Christ says. It's great to have you guys out this morning. It's amazing. Anytime we gather around God's Word, it's just pretty amazing. And those old hymns, not because I'm old, but I enjoy those. Whether it's the old hymns or something from Toby Mac. If it's God exalted, it's good. And that's kind of what I stand on that. I enjoy that. And, but it's great to be with God's people, live God's Word. And, this morning, actually, y'all bear with me. You know how you heard it said of people they can't chew chewing gum to walk when they're kind of they're challenged by the coordination. Well, I'm challenged by my mental coordination. I probably can't click and talk at the same time. Last time I tried that, I thought, anyway. So what I want to ask you to do something revolutionary today. If you got a Bible or your device or whatever, you can follow along with me. I'm going to be not a lot of scriptures this morning, but I'm going to be kind of jumping back and forth between Philippians chapter 3 and 1 Peter chapter 2. And then we're going to take a brief look at a passage in the Old Testament. But we're going to start out in the New this morning. You know, we just came through probably the busiest time of the year. You know, it starts about Thanksgiving. It goes through the first of the year. It's just crazy. Our obligations with family and friends and church and school and wherever, work. It's a crazy time. And you just catch your breath in before you know it, we're in spring, and then it kind of gets crazy again. So I thought this morning this year is still fairly new. And I thought it might be a good time if we just remind ourselves of a few things before we get full on into the busy season again, if you will. And I know we all have busy lives. Some of it's self-inflicted. You know, some of it can be self-destructive, I guess. And I heard a guy say the other day, he's talking about having a full plate. And you all know how I am. I'm kind of warped. My mind runs crazy places. And I got to think about that full plate deal. And I got to think about the different kinds of plates you see at church fellowship and how that looks. And my mind just went on this running thing. You know, you got the plates that are a reasonable proportion and neat. And then you'll see a child with a plate. Might have one spoonful of macaroni and cheese and maybe 6 or 8 brownies. and then you'll see one like my wife. I'll pick on her. She doesn't like her food to touch. Now look at that like a compartmentalized life. We all know that's wrong, right? That's wrong on a lot of living. And then there's one that's piled on. You know, and that's a picture of our lives. You know, the plate's not big enough sometimes, so we start stacking. And if you need a visual on that next time we have a church fellowship, check out Chad Walker's plate. That's your life. That's your life. That's the way it looks. But I thought, you know, sometimes we have a tendency to fill our lives with things that cause us to become inwardly focused rather than focus on God's purpose and the plan He has for our life. And I thought that's what we might take a look at this morning. If I were to ask you a question this morning, what's really important? What's God's purpose? Why are we here? You know, as believers, we would probably all at least be able to say the right things, right? But because of busyness in our lives, sometimes we have a tendency to forget what's really important. And the fact is, we're here for God. That's what's important. That's what we're created. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are His workmanship, and we're created in Christ Jesus for good works." And that's why we're here today. So our purpose is to be a part of, or an active participant in what God's doing in this world. And we know very plainly from His Word that His plan for this world is for them to be reconciled to Himself. From cover to cover, that's what it is. God drawing men to Himself. So for us, contrary to what the world throws at us every day, Our purpose is knowing Him and making Him known. Pure and simple, that's our purpose. So that's what we want to look at with this morning, just for a few minutes. He's got us on a journey, and we understand, we're for Him. He's not here for us. Sometimes that kind of gets switched, especially in this Western culture where we have a tendency to become consumers rather than servants. And that's what Jesus' life on this earth was. He was a servant, and that's what He left with us for our model as we live our lives. And it's sad to say that sometimes we just don't slow down and take time to think that through. If you haven't done it in a while, go look at Ecclesiastes and read. I read some of it this week. I'm not going to today for the sake of time. But there's some good stuff in there. A lot of wisdom. People that have everything. This guy had everything. A lot of wisdom. And he said, I've worked my whole life. I've acquired, accumulated all this stuff. It's all vanity. All vanity. And there's one place in there where he says, well, everything I've worked for, everything I've gained, somebody else is going to get it anyway. Wow, we know that to be true, don't we? Excuse me. Here's a good spot for me to, before we go any further, is to appeal to the young people in here. And when I say young, I mean teens on up through 30-something, okay? Because 30-something still really young to me, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's just a question, and this question really could be for anybody here, but specifically I'm talking to young folks now. What do you want your life to be all about? Because if you're not already asking this question, you probably are. But if you hadn't, you will. If you're not already searching for that thing that brings you satisfaction, you will be. It's in our DNA. I mean, it's, I've heard preachers preach on that a long time that, there's a God-sized vacuum in our life, and we spend our life looking for Him a lot of times in the wrong places. But think about that, guys. What do you want your life to be all about? It's good to pursue an education. Nothing wrong with that at all. But just remember, that's not what you're to be all about. It's sad to say there's probably a lot of older people in here that are still grasping and looking for that next thing, that thing that makes us happy. It's forced on us through media, especially TV. We're to get all we can get for ourselves, and we're always reaching for that next thing that we think will bring us satisfaction. And that's, like I say, that's our culture. You can make the list, anything, next new gadget, new whatever, iPhone X whatever now, XR, maybe a new truck, a new car. One day it'll be the perfect job, the perfect spouse, a nicer house. It just goes on and on and on. Nothing wrong with any of those things. We just need to be reminded occasionally that that's why we're here. And more is not always better. Matter of fact, a lot of times it's even worse. We see it in the news, on TV. If you watch anything at all, the people we see that are wealthy got everything they could possibly want for 2 or 3 lifetimes. Typically, not always, but the general rule is those people aren't happy, right? For a couple of reasons that they're always wanting just a little bit more, or they're worried about somebody taking what they already have. And actually, scientific studies show that people that look at these things will tell you that when we find the purpose outside of ourselves, that's when we're the most happy. And you guys that most all of us here probably had the opportunity, whether you're saved or unsaved, that when you're helping someone else, it usually helps you more than it does them. It makes you feel better. First thing that comes to mind, you guys at food pantry that have been so faithful. You've seen that in action. You felt that. It feels good to realize that, hey, I'm not the center of the universe. We're here for Him. We're here for a bigger purpose. And it's good every now and then. That's why I said it's so great for us to be here this morning. It's good for a lot of reasons that you're here on Sunday. Number one, God said that He created a day of rest. That's important. We forgot how to rest. But the other thing is, it says in Hebrews that we should gather together. And He gives a reason for that later on in that passage, and that is that we're to stir one another up to love and good works. And just remind one another, hey, Keith, it's not all about you. Darren, he can tell me the same thing. It's not all about you. It's about Him. And I've heard that said a couple times in all this morning. And you guys are great to help people, and you already know this, but sometimes we get so busy and so caught up. It's good just to remind ourselves of those truths that are not truths from Darren, but truth of God's Word. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 says that you are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body. And that takes us to the first scripture I'll look at this morning. It's in 1 Peter chapter 2. God's intention for us as believers is to have fellowship with one another and have fellowship with Him. We're His body. But in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, it says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light." I don't know about you guys, but most of the time I don't feel too royal or priestly, right? And I definitely don't feel holy. But I got to realize, and I got to be reminded from time to time, my value is not in my performance. My value is in who owns me, who made me. That's where my value is found. Yeah. I love cars, and I like to watch Barrett Jackson occasionally. Some of you may or may not know. If you're not a gearhead, you probably don't know. But they auction off these cars. I just like to look at old cars. And occasionally one will come across that block that's probably a nice car, but because of who owned that car, it'll bring 4 or 5 times what it's actually worth, or what it normally would bring. It's because of who owned it. Bring that a little closer to home. Say you got your average bass boat, nice, that's worth a little money. But for instance, if you had a bass boat, Dr. Fry back there, there you go. Man, that thing should be worth at least 50 more bucks. Yeah. But you get what I'm saying. It's in the ownership. Our value's in ownership. That's why we can breathe and relax and realize that my worth, my value's not in how big a house I have, or how much I've excelled in the business world, or how big my bank account is, or that next thing I'm reaching for. It's all about Him. Amen. And it gives that reason in that same passage there. Right after it says we're His own possession, it says, so we can proclaim the excellencies of Him who brought us out of darkness into light. A few months back at Christmas, we talked about the light coming into the world and how important that light was and how big a difference that light made not only in our own lives but in the entire world, and what that means. That light brought hope. And as believers, we have the privilege to be His ambassadors on this earth to spread that. And that's pretty exciting stuff if you think about it. How do we do that? If you look on that same passage, verse 12 says, keep your conduct honorable. Live with integrity. As good as what we have and what we're doing in here this morning is, and I'm thankful and humbled by the fellowship that we're enjoying right now. And I told those guys on Wednesday night, pray for it. We need to beg God and thank Him that the fellowship's good here, and we're getting to enjoy that. That's amazing. But as good as all that is, it pales in comparison to what we're going to be doing in the morning at 8 o'clock. What we do in the morning is a whole lot more important than what goes on in here. Does that make sense? And you guys that are here on Wednesday night, you can close your ears right now because I'm sure you hear this till you get tired of it. But we know as believers, we're justified before a holy God by faith. Grace alone, faith alone, right? But there's a passage in James that talks about being justified before men. Talks about how faith and works are intertwined. We're justified before men by our works, the way I live. So if I come in here this morning and I sing and smile and shake your hand and enjoy the worship service like we have up to this point, I'm saying that Christ is a priority in my life. So tomorrow, when I go wherever that may be, school, work, whatever, my life needs to still be saying, He's my priority. That's what's so important. So, as a believer, our message can't be mixed. If it's going to carry any weight with a lost and dying world, then absolutely. Truth is so obscure in this world now, people absolutely starve to death for something that's true. And we, as ambassadors of Christ, are the only one that has that answer. No one else can offer that. No one. Let's take a look in Philippians chapter 3 and see what Paul says here. This is an amazing statement here. If Darren and the rest of the people in the room had enough confidence in our walk with God that we could say what Paul says right here, this county would be different and this world would be different. Look at what he says in verse 17. It says, brothers, join in imitating me and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. Wow, he's saying, as I follow Jesus, you follow me. Do what I do, say what I say, act like me. That's a pretty bold statement. Verse 18 says, for many of whom I have often told you and tell you even with tears, his heart's broken over his people. Why? And we'll see. They walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with mindsets on earthly things. Paul's saying they got a bad appetite. Their appetites for earthly things. So, we know that our purpose is not what we're going to be doing at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? We know that. The life we're living, and it's just talked about this some in Sunday school this morning, but the life we're living now is a means to an end. Yeah, we have jobs, we have things to go to, we have responsibilities. But it's not the end all. It's not the end of all things. We're created for a different purpose. We have a different mindset. We have different goals in life, hopefully, as believers as we walk through this world. So, sometimes we act like it, trying to get all we can from this world, and that's the direction we pushed in. Young people hear me say that this morning. That's where the world, that's the way they'll be pushing you. If we're not careful, we do that instead of trusting God and allowing Him to see what He can get out of us. So, this world is not our home. We try hard sometimes to make it feel like it. And hear me say this, guys. I'm not up here berating you and beating you over the head saying you should be living in poverty and shouldn't have anything. Comforts are nice. They're blessings from God. We're enjoying them right now. We're in a climate-controlled building, padded pews, coffee in the back, everybody's happy, right? Nothing wrong with comforts, nothing wrong with wanting nice things for your family, nothing wrong. As long as remember, that's not why we're here. Remember, we're just passing through. I mentioned the old hymns that sung up here. There's some old hymns that talk a lot about that. I'm a stranger in this letter. This world's not my home. I'm just passing through. What was that one this morning, Friday? Goodbye world. We were talking about some of that stuff this morning. A lot of biblical truth in that. Sometimes we get too comfortable here because, especially in this culture, in Western culture, we're so blessed that we might start to get the ideal, we might not need God as much as people think we do. But there's people in the world right now struggling just to stay warm. And I'm not saying we're bad because we are warm. I'm just saying, remember where it comes from. Remember where that very next breath you draw is coming from. And who gives it to you. And the purpose He's given it to you for. Back in Philippians chapter 3 again, I didn't read this, but in verse 20, what does it say? It says, our citizenship is in heaven. So, we're in this world, but we're not of this world. And this truth should direct how we live. You and I live every day. And when I'm up here, I'm talking about myself right along with you guys. I got the exact same fallen nature that everyone else in this room does. But when we do this, we'll have a different perspective. People will notice. I guarantee you they'll notice because it's a foreign concept in this world to put others above yourself. And to acknowledge and care for the needs of others. So the bottom line, we're not of this world. And that verse that I had Jeremy put up in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. I skipped over it a minute ago, but I'm going to read it now. It said, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles. In other words, we're strangers. We're just passing through. To abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Again, we have the privilege of being His ambassadors. It's like we're from a foreign country. We're here to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. You ever feel like a stranger when you take a look at this world? I don't typically watch the news. I'll have the weather on sometimes, and it'll run into it, and there's a reason I don't. It's Dad fusses at me because I don't watch the news. I should be more informed to keep up with world events, but usually when I watch it, I either get angry or I'm sad or something. If you really watch it religiously, you'll be depressed. It's like celery, right? I just don't like it. But when I do watch it, I feel like a stranger. Janine and I have looked at one another before and said, this world is not our home. And hopefully, if you're in here this morning, you're a believer, you've had that feeling, you understand that concept that we're just passing through. And I'm on the other end of that spectrum, and I guess that's why I want to appeal to young folks in here so much today, because the Lord has so much for you that's so much better than what the world's trying to paint a picture for you.
Yeah.
Amen.
I probably shouldn't say this. It's Friday confessed in Sunday school this morning. I'll confess. In 2 more months, I'll be 60 years old.
Glory.
So I'm not standing up here as a picture of wisdom. I'm standing up here as a picture of experience. And I've looked and searched just like some of y'all are right now, only to come full circle to my Creator. And if I could tell you anything this morning to share with you, and be on that journey with Him. Oh my.
Amen.
With that said, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2. First Corinthians chapter 2 verse 9 says that no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor is it entered into the heart of man, or the imagination of man, what God has for those that love Him.
Amen.
God wants to take us on an amazing journey. A journey has to be a journey of faith. He wants to show you and I some amazing things if we just trust Him. And that's what this verse right here is talking about. With that said, I want to take just a few minutes and look at an Old Testament example of a journey of faith. Old Testament of all things. You say, wait a minute. But yeah. There's a lot of stuff in there to be learned in the Old Testament. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, he says, talking about the children of Israel, he said, now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction. So it's always good to look at the Old Testament. God put it there for a reason. It's there to teach us. And as I said earlier, from the very beginning, God's been reconciling man to Himself. Everything in this book points to the cross, points to Jesus. But I want to look at, if you want to turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 12, very, very, very familiar story. All of us pretty much know it by heart. It's a story of the first Passover. We know that the children of Israel had been in bondage in Egypt for 430 years. God heard their cry. He raised up Moses. You know the story. Him and Aaron went to talk to the king and tell him that, you know, he needed to let his people go. And they went through the plagues. But now we're to where I want to look at today. We're to the 10th and final plague. And God has told His people, He's warned them that doom's coming. About to have a really bad night in Egypt. And we know the final plague was the death angel was going to pass over. And the firstborn of every creature, man and beast, was going to be dead. So God gave His people some prescriptions and instructions on how to avoid that. Listen, I'm not going to read it all for don't want to bore you guys and take too much time, but if you look in chapter 12, verse 3, it says, tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of the month, every man shall take a lamb according to the father's house, a lamb for a household. And if you read on down there in verse 5, it says, of course we know this from talking about the sacrificial lambs at Christmas. It said, your lamb will be without blemish, a male a year old. Obviously, parallels with Jesus being the perfect lamb and sacrifice. And if you read on down there in verse 6, it says, the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. That's important, remember that. Then we know the drill. They take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts, then across the lintel of the door, and do not go outside. And when I see this blood applied, I will pass over. And then it goes on, gives instructions about how to cook the lamb and all that. But there's a part of this story sometimes, and I heard a message on this, it's amazing. But there's a part of this that's generally overlooked in this story. If you look down at verse 11, in the very same passage, it says, in this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. Eat it quickly. Now remember when we read back up in verse 6, it said this happened all in the evening. Twilight is in the evening. Generally, the guys probably came in, propped their staff in the corner somewhere, loosened their belt, had their shoes off. You guys know the drill. You know what I'm talking about. My grandson Maxon calls that putting on your comfy clothes. But basically, they'd come in to enjoy the evening meal, probably relax a little bit. And another reason, we're probably pretty sure this is the way they did it, because God told them otherwise right here. He says you need to have your belt fastened. You need to have your staff in your hand, shoes on, staff in hand. Be ready. I'm getting ready to do something big. We know the whole story, right? We're far removed from that. We have it according to God's word. We know all what was going to go on with the children of Israel, right? We know the story. But they didn't. It was an act of faith for the Israelites to do exactly as God has prescribed, to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, and prepare the lamb, eat the first Passover meal, to do all that. But God didn't intend for this to be a one-time, this amazing experience to happen one time, and that be it. He's going to free them from bondage. We all know that. He wanted to do more than just set them free. He wanted to give them a whole new way of life. And they would never be the same after this day. And as we look at this story, the parallel between this Old Testament passage here and our new life in Christ, it's unmistakable, isn't it? It's a picture of God's provision. In the Old Testament, Egypt was a picture of the world, or sin. They'd been in bondage all these years, and He was taking them out. When we trust Christ, we believe Him, we're in bondage, right? We're in darkness, and He brings us out. Great parallel there. And that's our symbolic, that's our Passover experience, our salvation experience. So, what did He do with the children of Israel? He led them, didn't He? Remember how He led them? Cloud by day, fire by night. He wants to lead us in that same way. He wants us to be led by the Spirit. He wants to take us to a whole new life. When He saved you and I, our salvation experience, that wasn't the end of it. An amazing event as that is, that wasn't the end. That was just the beginning of what He wants for all of us, for you and I. And it's a whole new life, but as I mentioned, it's a walk of faith. You remember what the first thing was? What's the first thing up for the Israelites when they left Egypt? Red Sea. Trial came up, didn't it? The same thing with our life, it don't take long when something comes up, and what I got to do is say, am I going to trust Him? Is He who He says He is? We're looking at James on Wednesday nights, and in James chapter 1 it says that these trials are for a purpose. They're to produce steadfastness in us, which means spiritual maturity. And that's God's plan for you and I today, that we attain that we attain spiritual maturity in Christ. So, in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, I'll have to turn and read that so I don't mess it up. Philippians chapter 1 verse 6 says, I'm sure this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of Jesus. That's another thing we need to remember. We're on a journey. He's growing us, but we won't reach full maturity till we see Him. And that's what we were talking about in Sunday school this morning. You know, and Fry mentioned it. He said, I still struggle with some of the same things I struggled with when I was young. And I'm thinking, me too, but that's life. It's a day-by-day process. It's a journey. It's trusting Him. It's not allowing the noise and all the glamour, for lack of a better word, of the world. Not allow that to get a hold of you to the point where you forget who you are. I used to tell my kids that every time they go out somewhere when they got old enough to leave the house, I say, remember who you are. They thought I was talking about they were a Gant, but actually I was reminding them that they belonged to the King. And that they were a royal priesthood. And that they were His possession. And that they were created for a good work, and that's to make a big deal out of Him. So, it's good to look back at our Passover, our salvation experience. They observe that every year, and we still do to this day around Easter. We talk about Passover, and we observe the Passover experience. But main thing is that we don't stay there. Sadly, people, go most of their whole life, and they're still at that one point. They hadn't progressed on past that. They've been brought out of bondage, they've been brought out of Egypt, but they haven't taken that journey that God wanted to take them on. You can attend church, put a little money in the offering, and Fry, he's my encyclopedia, I keep referring to him. But he was sharing a fact with us one day that regular church attendance in America today is considered a couple of Sundays a month. Not that that's the end all, not that that's a check list. You have to be here every Sunday. They used to give out those pins for perfect attendance. But it's that hunger, that desire to do just what you guys are doing this morning, to be around God's Word, to give God's Word some weight and importance in your life, and understanding that all direction and instruction and exhortation comes from this book. And putting value on that, and value of being with other people. So when we take this approach, we're just idling. And the thing about idling is if you're not careful, you go to drifting. And we've all done that. I've done that. We understand that doesn't go anywhere, and that's a bad end. And that delights the devil because he said, well, check, there's one that's not any good for what God's doing on earth. They're not effective. They're just idling. And when we do that, we never experience all that God has for us. There again, young people, hear me say that this morning. He's got so much for you. And He wants you to come alongside you. He wants to lead you. He wants to give you, the Israelites, God was taking them to Canaan, to a promised land, a land that had been promised to their forefathers. He was taken to a physical destination. God wants to take you and I to a whole new life today. Heaven is wonderful, and that's something to look forward to. And, if you're saved, you're going there. But that's not all it's about. He wants us to enjoy what we're doing now. Being a part of what He's doing on this earth. So, we know that if you continue reading that story, we know how it ends. We know that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. It took them 40 years to logistically take a 2-week journey. And they had a shortcut. And you and I got the same shortcut today. I wasted a lot of years in the wilderness. But we got the same shortcut that they could have had, and that was just to trust God. Read the story over and over. They grumbled. they didn't believe God. It caused them great grief and strife. And there again, young people, you can avoid a whole lot of that today by taking that shortcut and just trusting Him. And He'll give you that unbelievable life that we talked about. And their problem was they longed for the comfort of Egypt. Did you bring us out here to die? We're hungry. We're thirsty. No. They long. And we're all, honest with ourselves in here this morning. We understand that we're our own biggest enemy, right? The one that we look at in the mirror every morning, we're our own biggest enemy. It's our flesh. We long for the comforts of Egypt instead of trusting Him, who wants to take us on this amazing journey. There again, in 1 Peter chapter 2:11, it says we're in a battle. And that's something we need to understand this morning. We are in a battle. So it's 2019. How are we doing so far? Remember, we have a higher calling. We are citizens of heaven, bought by the blood of Jesus. And we're different, not just, hear me say this, not just to be different. That's just religion, be different, right? We're different because we're here for a different reason. We have a different purpose. Hopefully, we have a whole new attitude and a whole new life. And again, we're in the world, but not of the world. I heard a guy say this one time talking about that. He said, fish swimming in the ocean, they swim in salt water their whole life. But when you catch one and eat it, it don't taste salty. So we're in this world. But this world don't have us. Heaven is our home. We're just passing through. And Peace Haven Baptist Church, belts fastened, shoes on, staff in the hand. God wants to take us on an amazing journey.
Amen.
Sometimes I think we don't dream big enough. Because we're afraid sometimes if we dream big, then we may have to make a big change in our life. And it might look like something that's not comfortable to us to have to change. I said a minute ago, I'm an old guy. Every time I've ever trusted Him, He's never let me down. And I'll say one more thing before I leave this morning. There may be somebody in here this morning that haven't had that Passover experience in their life. You may not have trusted Jesus. You may not have trusted the blood on the doorpost of your life of that precious Savior, the one that come and lived and died a sinless life just to reconcile you to Himself. He loves you that much. So, if there's anybody in here that doesn't know Him, or you've got questions about that, or you don't even understand anything I'm talking about, I'd love to talk to you and try not to confuse you too much. But I'd love to point you to that Savior that wants you to, and then you can be on that same journey. You can be on that journey with Him because that's His desire that I'll be on that journey. But please come down front and see any of us after the service. With that said, if you guys will stand up, I'll dismiss us. Heavenly Father, we love you this morning. We know that the provisions that you made in our life before us are many. And if I hadn't taken the time this week just to be still and be amazed and be humble and be thankful, generally just be in awe of you over something you've done in my life just this week. If I hadn't done that, then I'm too busy. Lord, I pray as we leave here today, we would examine ourselves and, Lord, that we would honor and rededicate our life to you to bring you the glory and honor that you deserve. We understand how much has been given. Salvation is really easy, but it wasn't cheap. We thank you for that blessing, that gift, that hope, that peace that we have, that we can live our lives knowing that we're not in bondage anymore to sin because you freed us. And not only that, you want to take us on a journey, a wonderful, amazing life, and show us things that we can't even comprehend or believe if we just trust you. And that's my prayer for this congregation today as we leave, Lord, that we would hold on to that. Every person in here from young to old understand that we're special and we're bought with a price. And we thank you so much for your son Jesus, and it's in his name that we make this prayer. Amen.
Amen.